Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. So today we are on the Longarm, and I am quilting my beautiful Tree of Life block. And I started out and I had an idea, and I've already stitched through a good chunk of it with this idea. It ended up not being my favorite, but rather than rip it all out, I'm going to keep stitching it. I'm going to show you what I'm doing, we're going to talk it through, and I'm going to figure out a way of continuing to quilt and figure out a way how to like it. So I think that this is a good process. This is definitely going to be a learning experience for us both, and you'll understand why I'm kind of having a little bit of a hesitation with this particular design, but I have a feeling that once I get the entire tree quilted, I am going to end up liking it. So let's get on the Longarm and learn how to quilt this together. So here is the path that I'm taking. I'm doing these bouncy corner-to-corner curves. So I'm going to go straight up, just bouncing from one corner to another. I'm just being careful about hitting that seam allowance. Now I'm going to come down and then over, and down and then over. And here's the thing that I just didn't quite like about it. It's just not very perfect. You know, sometimes my curves kind of slopes a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit big on one side and a little bit small on the other. I just started getting a little persnickety about it. And then I realized, you know what, that's a lot of ripping. So if I, stop here, that would be a lot of effort to try and fix it. So I'm just going to keep going with it. I'm going to go up the side of basically the tree trunk, since those are triangles too. I'm going to continue that same bouncy pattern. See, that one ended up being a lot more narrow than the others. If I had a circle template or circle ruler, that would certainly make this a little bit better. You can see that one was a little messy. But at the same time though, when all of the lines get on there, you're not noticing, the one bad, kind of slightly demented one. So I think that's okay. Okay, so I quilted through this entire section, and notice that I left this bottom row empty. I did that on purpose so that now I can just bounce corner to corner all the way down the line. And that way I didn't have to stop, I didn't have to break thread. I could quilt all of those triangles in one continuous line. And how I knew how to do that, it was really high tech, guys, it really was. I took my finger and traced it. And I traced it enough times until I figured out, oh, okay, if I don't go that way, which would leave me kind of at a dead end, and instead I just bounce up this way and keep going, then I can continue my pattern, and not break thread and not stop. So that really worked out well for me. Okay, so now let's talk about a background quilting design, since I'm here in the background, and I think a really good choice for this block would be sharp stippling. So this is basically just really long, curvy lines, and occasionally come to sharp points and make kind of a flame effect. And this can end up looking like fire, this can look like sky, like background. I just think it has a really nice effect. And it's nice and open. Notice that I'm keeping a good distance between my lines of quilting. Here I'm going to spread out, trying to stay about 3/4 of an inch away. And what I mean by that is the distance roughly from that line of quilting to that line of quilting is roughly 3/4 of an inch apart. And that's just going to ensure that this quilt block is nice and open. It's not going to feel too stiff when it's done. I'm going to carry this up to the line where I attach the block to the frame. And now I'm going to swing down. And notice that I'm working more or less in a row. So I kind of wiggled my way up there, and now I'm wiggling my way back down. And this is just ensuring that I'm not going to stitch myself into a corner. I'm going to quilt around that tree shape continually, and I'm not going to leave a pocket in the design where I have to go and wiggle back in there and potentially have a problem, because those lines of quilting will probably end up being closer together than they need to be. So I'm trying to keep things nice and open. I think I will kind of tuck down in between these triangles. I think that might look nice. Let's see. I can say that once I quilted all of those triangles with that curvy dot to dot quilting, I don't mind it so much. I'm glad I didn't stop and rip it all out. I really feel like, ripping there's just not a lot of learning going on when you rip out large amounts of quilting. And I already had it all stitched. I might as well leave it and just keep going. And in the end, you know, if nothing else, I've learned something. I've learned what not to do. I've learned that those triangles maybe need to be bigger for that design, or maybe I need a ruler to better control that, and then I'll like it better. So there we go. Just wiggling my way around. And then I need to think about how I'm going to finish off quilting the triangles that I have down here. But the one thing I want you to see is just how fast sharp stippling is to quilt. I'm just thinking about that curvy line coming to a sharp point and then wiggling back. I'm not really thinking about the pattern other than just simply that I want to tuck in there, fill in the space, tuck in there, fill in the space. That's really what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on getting to where I need to go in order to fill the space most accurately. Okay, just a little bit more. I think I can kind of, let's see. I'm kind of pushing the limits of my frame here. This is my ruler plate. I don't want to kind of hit up against this rail, otherwise that could mess up my design, but you can see I managed to quilt all the way through that area without breaking thread. Okay, so now we kind of have to think about this side of the design. I want to do that same thing where we're bouncing back and forth, but again, I don't want to break thread if I can help it. So I think I could manage to pull up thread here and bounce through. And I'm just tracing my finger along it to plan my design. I could bounce through there, then bounce up. That'll get me back up there. That's not really a good place for me to go because that's kind of a dead end, right? So maybe instead I'll bounce up to here, then I'll bounce down and then come over like this. Oop, no, I know I'll be hitting my rail if I come down that far, so I'll knock out this particular triangle. Yeah, I think I'm probably going to end up having to break thread a few times. You get the idea. You just have to stop and plan and think about it. In certain situations, though, especially when you're reaching the limit on the size of your frame, you might just end up with thread breaks no matter what you do. I could, let me try this one more idea. I could bounce here and here, leaving that space open, then go over and over. Let's think this through, and then I could bounce back over. If I get back over here, then that will be a dead end. But I could go up and over and then hit this triangle fully and then bounce back down. So it's kind of have to go over. I'm going to have to go over and up and down. Yeah, I think this is going to work though. Let's see. I might forget entirely what I just thought of doing. We'll see. It's really funny how sometimes I'll trace something and I'll have this whole idea in my head about the direction I'll go in, and then I'll go and do the exact opposite. All right, here we go. Nice, gentle curve. And, oh, I reached the end of my frame. Okay, I am definitely going to have to rip that back out again. Okay, so I'm going to rip this out, and I'll meet you back here when I have a better game plan about the rest of these curves. So I know how much space I have to quilt in, so I'm only going to knock out these top 3 triangles right here. So I'm going to come down, bounce over, just focusing on filling these 3 triangles up. So I want to come, whoop, that almost ended up being, well, not much of a curve, let's just say it that way. Put both hands on the handlebars and see if that gives me more control. And here's the thing, you know, no matter how your quilting turns out, I think the more thread you get on the quilt, the better it's going to look. And when you step back from it, you're going to notice that that particular line just isn't exactly perfect. Okay, so there we go. That's as much quilting as I can fill in that space without hitting my the rail on the front of my long arm. So now I'm going to break thread again. And whenever you end up with a situation like this where you have 4 threads in one place, I've got basically 2 thread breaks right here in the same location, what I'm going to do is give that top thread a tug. That's going to pull up a loop. That's my bobbin thread. So now I have 2 sets of threads here. I'm going to tie these off into 2 separate knots because isocord thread that I'm using, this is isocord sterling, is very slippery. And if I tie that all into one knot, all 4 threads, that will make, number one, a very big chunky knot. And then it will also be slippery and most likely come out. So that's the reason why I always tie it off and bury the threads in 2 separate passes. So there's 1 knot buried, and then here is, oop, I already tied that knot. No, need to tie it into another knot. There we go. Run that. What I'm doing is I'm running that with a cheater needle through the middle layer of the quilt, and I just pop those thread tails into that needle and send it through. And I have a much more detailed tutorial on that. You can find it on my website, leahday.com. So that is how I deal with all of my thread breaks. Okay, now I'm going to advance the quilt really quickly. Just pull off my quilt clip, unlock my bars, and roll up this block. And let's see how much I can get. I got all of that. I got more than half of the block knocked out. It feels great, but it's probably still going to take a third. I'm probably going to have to go through a third time and push it through a third time to make sure I get everything quilted. These blocks are definitely supersized. So here we go. Smooth out my batting so that's nice and soft. And this is something that confused me when I was first starting long arm quilting. I got my backing fabric just really, really stiff, and I just thought that that was the right way to do it. Well, it turns out that, you know, if you tighten up your backing and get those rails just too much tension going on them, you can actually create some skipped stitches. So keep that in mind. If you're new to long arm quilting, there is a little bit of a learning curve, and it's definitely one of those things you got to think about. Okay. So now we have the second half of the triangles, and again, I think my other path is going to work great. I'm going to bounce out from one corner and then down, so over and then down, over and down, and then I'll bounce straight up. And then I'll do that again. This time I'll bounce, actually that's going to leave a little tail right there, but if I get started right here and bounce over first, I think that's a better way to start. So this is the advantage of tracing your finger over the quilt, is that if ever you find yourself kind of, okay, well that's going to be missing, you know, you always have to think through it just a little bit more. And this is not rocket science. It's just tracing your finger over the quilt and making sure that every line gets hit and every line gets taken care of. That's all it is. There we go. Bounce all the way back up again. That looks good. And I'm going to end up right there. It would be great if I ended up right there, so that way I could go into quilting right there. So actually, if I pull up thread here, then I can bounce up and over. See? Look at that. Just a few more seconds of planning, and now I have a complete path, and I'll be able to continue quilting from there. So that's, in my opinion, absolutely worth a few extra seconds or minutes that it takes to plan it out. My needle became unthreaded, so I'll just thread that back up again, get it back underneath the foot, and pull up thread right there. So here we go. Just trying for nice even curves, but I'm also kind of just accepting if they're not absolutely perfect. I've been looking at the other ones that I stitched, and they're okay. They're not too bad. I am getting a little bit more bounce this time, just simply because I had to lift my back rail. So now the quilt is higher, so it's a little bit bouncier. That's okay. But I feel like I'm actually doing a better job keeping my curvy lines, my little curves, a little bit more controlled this time. They're a little bit more even, I think. And that's just the nature of practice. I do think this design would look better if it was more consistent. And, you know, that would be finding the perfect size ruler for this particular size triangle. And that, you know, that seems a little persnickety to me. When it's, you know, we only have this one block and I don't know if we'll use this exact same shape again. So I think doing it freehand is much better. And I think you can see my path. Let's be sure that I'm not going to hit the bottom of my frame, though. I'm not sure I'll be able to quilt all the way down to hit this guy. Let's just see. I'm going to cross my fingers. You can see just how much space I have to quilt in, I'm also limited. This back rail can hit the back of my machine too, so I have to just watch out for both things. We're aiming for that corner. There we go. Oh, got it. Nice. Now I'm going to bounce straight up. So I'm just bouncing out and in. It's a very simple movement, but I can promise you I would be able to quilt this much more evenly on my home machine, definitely. So that's definitely an idea. You know, if you're kind of looking at this going, that's a little bit on the messy side, well, you'll probably be able to quilt it a little prettier than I do because you're going to be quilting it on your home machine or with a ruler in your hand, one or the other. Now I'm going to work my way down. I'm going to have to accept that that little blue triangle right on the end might end up not getting quilted in this pass at least. One idea would be I could advance the quilt through the long arm. I know I can hit that point, but I think it's definitely going to push it to hit that last one. So you have to think, okay, should we just advance the quilt? And I think let's just advance the quilt by just a little bit and lock it back down again. I think that's the best move because, you know, you're right here. You don't want to leave it open and blank. You know, it's already, you want to get it done. So here we go. Corner to corner and out. And then now I'm going to go straight up. Bouncing up. And I think part of the problem too is that I just really loved my undulation design on the other block. And when you have something that just kind of works out almost perfectly, it's kind of hard to, I don't know, it's almost hard to top that. So that might be also part of the reason why I'm not liking this quite as much. Okay, to fill in these triangles up the tree trunk, I'm just, again, bouncing back and forth. I think I'm going to reach, I got to think through what I want to do in these squares because I could do the exact same thing in the squares too. I think that would look pretty nice. I can just go corner to corner on the squares, then get down to the triangle. I know I can knock out that triangle because I knocked out this one. I have enough space. So yeah, let's do that. I'm going to bounce down twice, then back up. Probably going to have to break thread a little bit in here in order to quilt all of these edges, but let's just go for it. Hit that corner. Now let's bounce out. Let's just keep going kind of as an outline around and just see how that looks. We are going through some seam allowance and that can get a little hairy. So just watch out for that. If you feel like your machine's not wanting to stitch something, just kind of give it a minute to catch up with you. All right, let's think this through. First off, I'm very sorry. That doesn't look very good. This is absolutely driving me crazy, guys. I will be completely honest, but I am refusing to allow myself to rip out the stitches. It's gonna be fine. I keep telling myself that. I hope it really is. So let's see here. I can bounce down. I can do some quilting inside. I think that might make that triangle especially look a little bit better. I will probably end up having to break thread a lot if I do that, or I can keep going straight up the trunk. I think I want to go straight up the trunk. Let's do that. Let's continue the pattern that I've already established with this tree. And there's no right and wrong way of doing this. If you end up with some extra thread breaks, please don't feel like that's a bad thing, because it's not. You know, thread breaks happen. Sometimes we just have to deal with it and make the best of it. I'm just trying to save a little bit of time having to tie off and bury thread breaks. All right, here we go. Bouncing over, bouncing up, and then now I can just bounce straight down right along the edge, the outer edge of my tree trunk. Just one point to the other. There we go. Okay, so I'm back down here. I need to come up this tree trunk the same way, but I might want to go on ahead and knock out just a little bit of this bouncy quilting. What could I do? I could come down and over, and that will connect me there. That will leave only a few lines. So I think that's a good choice. Yeah, that looks like a good choice to me. maybe anything that I could do, I could kind of stitch in and come back out. Yeah, I can, it's just kind of a lemon peel or orange peel design, wherever you can stitch in, and you kind of go in, and then it's a U-turn, come right back out again. Well, that worked out pretty good. I only have one missing line right here and one missing line right here. So that's a lot better than what it could have been. Not too bad. Now I'm going to bounce up that tree trunk. What I don't like is, you know, having a very short thread. So like I'll probably have to pull up thread and just stitch a short little thing, and I don't particularly like that idea. So let's see if I can maybe incorporate this into my wiggly sharp stippling and somehow work that out. I don't know if this will work or not, but it'll be kind of fun just to try it. So I'm just wiggling around, nice open flame shapes. The key here is just open flame. You don't want that to get dense. You want your quilt block to stay nice and soft. Now I'm going to connect right there, do my last curve, and break thread. And then I'll pull up thread down here, and I'll advance the quilt so that way I can quilt through this entire area basically all in one pass. So you can see it's a planning process. You've got to think through what you're quilting, where you need to go next in the design, and then also on a frame, you've got to also think about the limitations of the size of your frame. I know if I got started quilting, I know I advanced the quilt a little bit, so I'm not even sure I could pull up thread right there. Let's just see if I can. But I have very little room. Like that right there is the limitation of my frame. So what I'm going to do is pull up thread. I'm going to advance the quilt so that way I have a lot more space to work in. And then that's going to allow me to finish off this area nicely. So pulling up thread to the top. And just take a few stitches in place with my needle up, needle down, just so that way those thread tails don't get sucked into the back of the quilt. Now I just realized I need one more line. I need that line too. So there we go. Now I'm going to roll up the quilt and be able to knock out this background section. So I hope you can see exactly how I quilted around the entire tree. And then now it's just a process of filling in all of the background with this sharp stippling design. I'm going to keep these thread tails tucked out of the way and get back to sharp stippling. And I think the thing that I tend to do whenever I'm quilting sharp stippling, even when I'm quilting it as a background design, is I do tend to bring those lines in close. Typically on about a 1/2 inch scale is what I'm most comfortable with. So I just have to remind myself that it can be quilted a little bit more open than that. There we go. Now I'm going to work my way back and try and kind of interconnect this with the sharp stippling I have from before. That looks nice. Just a nice overall flaming texture. Now I'll swirl around this way. And I'll hook that in. That looks good. You can see basically that was a row. I stitched into that area, I formed a row, I interconnected it with the row before, with what I quilted before, and then I wiggled my way back out. I didn't leave gaps or holes in the design. And this is exactly how I quilt on a home machine too. This is not just unique to a long arm. This is how I quilt on a home machine too. And this is pretty much exactly the same path that I would have taken if I was quilting on a home machine, because I have the exact same goals. I want to minimize thread breaks. I don't want to have to break thread a million times just to stitch a simple design. And I want it to be done efficiently with nice open design. Now you might be wondering why I'm not filling all the way to the outer edges. First off, you don't need to. We're not going to use the entire block. And the second reason is that's the size of my frame. When I re-advance the quilt through the arm, through the rails, that's where I ended up. So I can't quilt beyond that. That's my kind of where I have to stop. And I think that's good enough. I don't feel like I really need to quilt beyond that. Now if you want to, you can absolutely add some spirals to your sharp stippling. I like to think that that turns it into hot, hot spiral. That's another design that I love. You do some flame shapes and some spirals together. That looks really nice. At any point in time, if you need to get somewhere else in the design, just travel stitch up the sides. Keep in mind that our blocks are pieced bigger than we need for the pattern. And then we trim them down to the correct size right before we're connecting them together to create our finished quilt. So there we go. I'm just going to continue filling in all of this background area with sharp stippling. And here's what it looked like whenever I finished quilting this Tree of Life block. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot quilting this Tree of Life quilt block with me. If you'd like to find the pattern, you can find it at leahday.com/friendship. You can also find all of the tutorials that we've shared so far, both quilting on our home machine and quilting on a long arm. Now, as for my long arm, this is the Grace Qnique 14 Plus or 15R, pretty much the same machine, just a different name that we have now. And I'm quilting on the Continuum frame. And I am a dealer for Grace Company now, so if you'd like to learn about the system that I'm quilting on, you can find it at leahday.com/grace. And if you're interested and you use the coupon code Hello My Quilting Friends, you get a nice discount on your order. So come and check that out at leahday.com/grace. And until next time, let's go quilt.